As live as it gets.
As live as it gets too.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Let's record it too.
Recording in progress.
Matt, why do we have to
Yeah,
start
yeah,
each
yeah,
one
got
of
it, got it,
these?
got it. There you
Each
go.
one of these with your volume up. Didn't you ever call the radio back in the day and have them yell at you to turn the volume down? It's the same thing. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Lovecraft Easing podcast. We have a special guest today, Leslie Klinger. Hey, Les. Thanks for doing this. Hey. Well, listen, let's do introductions real quick, and then let's talk to Les about Annotated Watchmen, Annotated Lovecraft, Dracula, Frankenstein, Sherlock Holmes, and all kinds of stuff.
Hyde. Hey, yeah.
You've been busy the last few decades. Mark, you have some great news about your book.
Oh yeah, my newest novel, a rather Lovecraftian, The House at Blacktooth Pond. We just got a starred review in Publishers Weekly this week, so that
Great.
makes me very happy.
Yeah, I just started that today, and I'm like 8 chapters in.
Well, I hope it scares the pants off of you, but I'm not going to be
Like I'm wearing
responsible for your pants. Yeah, well,
probably the blurbs that you received on it is what intrigued them about it.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Well, a couple of you guys went above board right there, and it is most appreciated.
Well, it's all kidding aside, everybody. It's a really great read. So especially if you're into Lovecraftian stories. So Pete, you want to introduce yourself?
No, I do not.
All right,
but
we'll move on.
Pete Rollick. I don't know. What am I? I write crappy Lovecraftian fiction.
Fisherman. You're a fisherman.
I'm a fisherman.
And then you also do things.
I think Langan wrote about him, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Matt. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
you weren't done.
No, I'm good.
Right. Okay. Hi, I'm Matt. I run Lovecraft Easing Movie Night. Maybe in the latter half of the show, we can talk about what we watched last night. I do have a prize. It's the card game, Cthulhu, the Great Old One. And you could win this if you send an email to easingprizes@gmail.com. Put green in the subject heading. It's the color of the box. We'll draw a winner in about 8 weeks. Who knows? Might be you.
If you have even better chance if you also email an Amazon gift certificate to me, and I'll let Matt know to stack the deck accordingly.
Actually, what I have them do is if they put their entry on a $20 bill and mail it to me, who knows what might happen.
Alan.
Hey, I'm Alan Hughes, and I do sundry tasks on the eZine web page.
And Alan has some questions lined up for you too, Les.
Great.
For those out there who don't know who you are, Les, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I am by day just a boring tax lawyer. By night, I try to be exciting and vibrant and alive. I write. I don't write fiction. I leave that to people with actual talent. And I write lots of footnotes. I've edited the annotated Sherlock Holmes, the annotated Dracula, the annotated Frankenstein, annotated Jekyll and Hyde, American Gods, Watchmen, Sandman, and most relevantly here, 2 volumes of the new annotated HP Lovecraft. I should mention that I assume some of you have decided not to spring for the big 5-pound books, and so Norton did a paperback edition called The Call of Cthulhu and Other Tales. That was 10 stories. That came out about 2 years ago. We're working now on a second paperback volume, which will have it's called something like Weird Tales of Science. It's all Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily new material. It's all the same material that's in the annotated, but it's in a paperback form, so it's much more accessible. That'll be out maybe later this year. And I hope some of you picked up on the Audible project that came out last
We
October
did.
called The Essential HP Lovecraft, which was 56 stories with wonderful cast of readers. And I twisted Audible's arm to let me, they engaged me to write an introduction for the material and story introductions, and they let me read them. So that was a real treat, my first experience as an audiobook narrator. But I didn't read the stories. They have real actors reading the stories and wonderful, wonderful readers, including Scott Brick, Simon Vance, and a number of other illustrious readers.
As one of our friends the other night said, it's kind of a who's who of audiobook readers.
They
No.
let me audition the readers. That was really cool.
Oh, wow.
They sent me audio clips of different readers and said, "Do you think this one works for this story and this one for that story?" And so it was really fun to do.
Wow, that's great. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in this, and you should be, it's free if you've got a Lovecraft, or excuse me, if you've got an Audible membership. You can just add it to your library, just like that. As well, you can get the whole thing at one, and you can also, I don't know why you'd want to do this, but you can also listen to the stories just by themselves individually. Audible has them all clipped out too. So,
One of the fun parts of it, although I didn't quite know what to do with it, was that the various readers kept emailing me saying, "So I just want to go over some pronunciations with you. How do you pronounce these things?" And of course, I said, "Who the heck knows? But okay, let's at least be consistent. And here's how I pronounce it in my head."
yeah. Well, yeah, let's start with Essential Lovecraft, the audiobook then. Alan, I think you have some questions on that for Les.
Well, I was just interested in mainly like how it came about, what you decided to put into it.
Well, it came about, it was Audible's idea. They basically came to me. They knew that I had done this, and they came to me and said they wanted to do this. We started the project, back in 2022, I think. And initially the engagement was help them pick the stories, which was easy because the answer was all. Or all except if, we left out Sweet Ermengarde and things like that. We left out the stuff that's meaningless, but it's 56 stories. So it was pretty much
It's
everything.
50 hours.
Yeah, it's a lot, including Dream Quest and things like that. So um, so the selecting the stories was easy. It was sort of like, well, let's get rid of these 4 or 5 and let's do everything else. And then they wanted me to write a fresh introduction. They didn't want to just license the introduction that I had done for Norton. So I had to write a fresh introduction, and they wanted me to write an introduction for each of the stories. Again, not the Norton introductions.
Yeah.
So I did, and that was a lot of fun. And I thought that was going to be the end of the engagement. I had said to them, kind of half kidding, "Can I read it?" And as the project finally got moving forward, they said, "Sure, here's the studio, show up, read, etc." So it was a treat to do, and I actually got paid. I will say that. Yes, it was.
Always a
They were
plus.
very generous, very supportive. The guy who was the editor, whose name doesn't appear anywhere, I think is Thomas Knight, and he's a real genre fan. He loves Dracula, he loves Jekyll and Hyde, Sherlock Holmes, all that stuff. So.
How long did it take to record your part?
About 7 or 8 hours, and then you go back, and there's always some pickups. There's always some, could you come in and read that sentence again? So it was like 6 or 7 hours the first go round, and then there was another couple hours to sort of fix things that when they listened to it, they decided not to do it. It's really an interesting process. There's a director and a producer, right? Where sort of an engineer and a producer right with you at the time. And in this case, Tom is in New York and the engineer was here. And as the reader, when you flubbed something, and that's fine. You can just say, "Let me do that again." Sometimes they'd say, "Could you read that sentence again?" It just didn't come across right, or it wasn't clear. I didn't pause in the right place. One of the challenging parts for a first-time reader was that for the introduction, there's a number of parts of the introduction where I quoted at some length from either Lovecraft himself or from some critics here and there. And I decided that I needed to make it sound different. I didn't want to have it be the same, I wanted the reader to be able to tell that this was not Les Klinger, this was somebody else. And then to try and remember what I made that reader sound like when I was doing a later segment with the same critic was an interesting challenge. But this is something audiobook readers audiobook actors deal with all the time. But for a newbie, it was interesting.
Now, question: did with your different narrators, did they each like read a story, or did they do different parts within?
No. Each there are not 56 different narrators. There's probably 30 or 35 different narrators. And yes, they did one story. I mean, same reader for a single.
Right. That's what I'm getting
I
at.
don't know if you're an audiobook reader. I read
I
it.
am very, very much so. Yes.
Me too. And it's a real talent. It's
I'll
not
say.
a talent I have. It's a real talent to do that. And to be able to, first of all, just keep consistency of the characters sounding alike and just dealing with, multiple characters in a book and different points of view. I'm reading Anne Leckie's Translation State right now, a science fiction novel. And there are three distinct points of view. And the same narrator just keeps switching from sort of sounding like this character telling the story to that character telling a real talent.
There was it was brought to my attention just how much talent it took, that it wasn't as easy as it looks or sounds like, when I hired somebody to narrate a book I published called The Sea of Ash, and there's three different protagonists as well as the other characters, and the way he made them sound so differently to differentiate them between each other was just amazing to me.
It takes real talent. It's a real art.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm listening to the latest or the last set of Repairman Jack books by F. Paul Wilson, and they're narrated by Alexander Sindys, and he is absolutely incredible because he may do 20 different characters, and each one is so individual. It's very, very easy to forget that you're listening to the same guy doing it.
Yeah. Anything else,
Why
Alan? Go ahead,
I'd like
Les.
to say I'd like to say it's why they get the big bucks, but they don't. It really doesn't pay very well to be an audio actor. The top guys, they just it's too bad, but they just don't make a lot of money at it.
Any chance of Audible bringing some of your other works to audio format?
Well, we were talking about it, so we'll see. It's, Scott Brick, actually, who's a friend and a wonderful reader, I think, wanted to do the annotated Dracula. And I kept saying, really? How are you going to do the footnotes? And he's had some plan in his head. We'll see if that project ever comes to fruition. But
what did he say? How do you do the footnotes?
I have no idea whether he'd just do it in a different voice, or whether he would do an alternate track where, there's a beep. I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be
Holmes would work well, but
yeah, but you don't want to distract from the story. You want to be able, that's why I love the ebooks. The ebooks where you can, if you want to read the footnote, you click on the link, and if you don't want to read it, you don't.
Yeah. Especially when they just do the pop-up as the footnote on Kindle. Yeah. Anything else on Essential Lovecraft, Matt? Or, I'm sorry, Matt, Alan.
No, I don't think it's 50 hours. It's a great, I'm still working my way through it, but I love your introductions. It brings something new to the stories.
Thanks.
That's true. I was rereading the introduction to Annotated Watchmen again this morning, and just the reminder of what the world was like in
Oh, yeah.
1985 really brought it back home.
Well, it's not just 1985, of course, Mike. It's also, I mean, well, if you want, we'll get into Watchmen. That's a whole subject, but
Yeah. Well, okay, before we get into Watchmen, then I did want to ask you, I think, if my research is correct, you graduated from law school in 1970. Is that right?
mm-hmm.
I would imagine you didn't say to yourself, I know what I'm going to be doing in about 30 years. I'm going to annotate things like Sherlock Holmes and Watchmen. Well, not in 1970, you didn't think Watchmen, but, you know, Dracula and Frankenstein and all that.
Well, I actually did think I was going to do Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, really?
Now, I mean, it was a fantasy, but it was like someday. I mean, my introduction. I've told this story many times that I got hooked on Sherlock Holmes by the Baron Gould edition. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I probably read some stories in high school. I don't remember that. It made no mark on me. I was a science fiction reader. That's all I wanted to read. I read boatloads of science fiction. And my girlfriend, later first wife, got me the annotated Sherlock Holmes, and I loved it, loved it. And I think I had this mild fantasy that maybe someday when I was retired, I would be the person who would update Baring Gould. But in the mid 90s, my wife Sharon um, one day said to me, instead of getting me off her back because I was pestering her about what we were doing that weekend, what are our plans? And she said, why don't you go write something? You have all those damn books. And I thought about it, and I thought, okay, well, and the kids were grown by then. And so I did. I started writing essays, and then I tried my hand at annotating a couple stories, and one thing led to another, and there it was.
I read, I think it was in your introduction to Annotated Dracula, that you had spent so much time annotating all the Sherlock Holmes stories that you kind of didn't want to leave that Victorian era world. And
Right.
so Dracula was appealing to you.
Yes, and my wife suggested that. Sharon said, I mean, yeah, I loved doing the Sherlock Holmes books, and I wanted to do more, and I wanted to do some more annotating. That was really fun. And she said, "Why don't you do Dracula?" So, yeah, I think I probably told you the story before, Mike, that in those young days of hubris, picked up the phone and called the senior editor at Norton and said, "I have great news. My next book is going to be the Annotated Dracula." And he said what you would expect. He said, "Oh." And at that point, I said to myself, "Oh, maybe I'm not the kind of author who calls the editor of a major publisher and tells him what his next book is. Maybe I have to like pitch it and try and sell it."
Could be.
But the short version is that 2 weeks later, he called me back and said, "Yeah, let's do it." So
well, there's a lesson there somewhere.
The rest is history.
If you never ask, or in your case, tell, the answer is always no, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's.
So you didn't start reading Sherlock Holmes until sometime after you were married?
Law school, yeah.
Law school, okay.
1968. Baring Gould had just come out. And yeah. And at that point, I said to myself, there's a whole world out there of crime fiction that maybe I ought to be familiar with. And so I read all the Sherlock Holmes stories, but I also read, Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie and Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and, sort of dove into the world of mystery fiction because I figured I sort of had to. And it was this great discovery. But Dracula led me back toward the sort of the fantastic. And, I'd always loved, I mean, I read Tolkien in college. I was explaining to one of my children that, and none of you are quite old enough to remember that in 1964, the big deal was, I think maybe it occurred in 1963, but in 1964, Ballantine Books published the paperback editions of Lord of the Rings. And
those were the ones I read.
Every dorm room in America had a Welcome to Middle Earth poster on the wall.
They had those great psychedelic covers on them.
Yeah. And, it was everywhere. And
What I remember is it freaked me out when I realized you could put them together to make one picture.
they were wonderful. And that really was eye-opening to me because I'd read, as I said, I had read tons of science fiction in high school, but I hadn't gotten to the fantasy stuff. I hadn't gotten to, the Wormer or Burroughs or Gorman Gast or C.S. Lewis. I'd never read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, um, and those books. So Tolkien was a doorway. It was the, entry way. What do they say? The
Gateway drug.
gateway drug to all that fantasy stuff. And by the way, I mean, it's now going to come full circle. I am doing, I think you know this, Mike, I'm uh, working on an annotated edition of Lord Dunsany's work.
Mm.
That's a book co-edited with Guillermo del Toro. And I've already done a lot of the work, but we're getting ready to sort of move ahead. I'm going to travel to Ireland this year and go meet with the Dunsany family. And there
Oh,
is a
wow.
Lord Dunsany again. He's the grandson of the Lord Dunsany who wrote all his books. But so King of Elfland's Daughter, Gods of Pagania, and Of Time and the Gods will be in this volume.
Well, it kind of begged the question of my.
That's very exciting. When is that coming out?
Yeah.
Well, probably no sooner than end of next year. I would say end of 2026 is a reasonable goal. That means I got to turn it in this year, probably maybe 2027, but not because I mean I've already gone pretty far, but I'm hoping to see the manuscripts and his journals and notebooks, and to include a lot of material there. Um, and Guillermo has promised to write a long, and this is his idea. He actually approached me and asked me if I would do this with him, and I said, of course. Um, so he plans to be a real co-author, but he's going to let me do all the footnotes.
I was about to ask when if you're co-editing with Del Toro, what is he doing and what are you doing? Is he giving you all the hard work?
Well, I mean, I've done all the scholarly stuff, and I
Yeah.
expect, I mean, the way I've collaborated with other writers in the past has been, especially in cases where it's an original author, and this is we'll get into Watchmen in a minute, is that I've written all the notes. Well, for example, Neil Gaiman. So when I did American Gods, and Neil, before I got involved with Neil's direct input, he gave me literally bushel baskets full of manuscripts and notes. This was various versions of the manuscript. This was journals that he had kept while he was writing it and all that. So I plowed through all that and did all kinds of independent research, sort of doing what I think of with Neil as always sort of reverse engineering, trying to figure out where he got something that's in the book. And then hit him with the manuscript with my version of whatever it was, 800 footnotes or something. And then we spent at least 12 hours going through it on the phone or on a Zoom meeting, just sort of one note at a time, talking about each note and what did I get right? What did he think I had misunderstood? What did he think I should note that I didn't? And some of them were like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. So it was really fun to do, but you can't do that with Conan Doyle or Bram Stoker or
Right.
Lovecraft,
It's hard to get a hold of those guys.
But I expect Guillermo will be actively involved in the notes. So I got to do the same on Watchmen. So that's why I say this is a good segue
Yeah.
if we want to talk about Watchmen.
Absolutely.
So I think I've told the story before, maybe on the show or not, that so that book came about because I had done Sandman and I was out at DC having lunch with the editor who had worked on Sandman with me. And I said to him, we were very pleased with Sandman, we were wrapping it up. And I said, I'd love to do Watchmen. And he said, we don't take unsolicited material. We have to solicit you. You can't solicit us about material. okay. He said, but write up a proposal. So I wrote a proposal, and 6 months later, I got a call from him saying, we're going forward with Watchmen. And that's literally what he said. And I said, with me? He said, well, yes, of course.
So, in other words, you did solicit it.
I guess. It sort of innocently solicited it. But then I reached out to Alan Moore. I'm friends with his daughter Leah, and Alan had written the introduction for my first Lovecraft volume. And I reached out to him and said, would you help me with Watchmen? And he said, essentially, not a chance. He said, I have burned my manuscripts. I have no interest in talking about Watchmen ever again. Okay, fine. And then somebody at DC put me in touch with Dave Gibbon, who couldn't have been more open and helpful, said, I know Alan's burning his manuscripts. I'm donating a set of them to the British Museum, however. And he shared his complete set of the scripts with me. And then, as I said, I'd done with Neil, read every single note and gave me comments about this is right, this is wrong, you misunderstood this, etc. And so it was a very, very helpful collaboration.
What
So when you were going through the Watchmen, it's so rich in historical detail, pop culture detail.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you decide what not to annotate? I mean, you could have.
Well, generally, I have the vacuum cleaner mentality, Alan, which is I leave, I joke around with my other writer friends who moan all the time about how they did all this wonderful research and then their editors made them cut 80% of it or 90% of it, and I say I never cut anything. I just stick it in there. The only things that I ended up leaving, well, not even leaving out, but let's say, I was going to say the word suppressing, but that's not a fair comment. DC had some sensitivities about a couple of things. They were very surprising. One of them was that at the beginning, I think I have a long footnote. I think it ended up that I can change their mind on it, but there's a long footnote about the smiley face and how in the sometime in the 70s or 80s, there was a major litigation over who owned the smiley face, whether it was a trademark and was it protected and all that. And DC said to me, we don't want you to talk about it. It was like, why? Well, because we weren't really involved in the litigation and we don't want anybody to sue us. It's like, wait a minute, guys, this book came out 30 years ago. Isn't it a little late to worry about that? But it was that was their sensitivity. And interestingly, they had similar sensitivity about certain aspects of Sandman. One of the panels in Sandman, for example, shows a TV playing in the background. It has nothing to do with the plot. You just see the TV in the background and you see a talk show on the screen. And one of the characters on the screen says something about "So Montiel," and I had a footnote that's saying that was Montiel Williams, who was a TV talk show host at the appropriate time. And DC said, no, you got to cut that out. I said, why? They said, well, we never got his permission to use his name and likeness in the book. Again, guys, this is 30 years ago. He's not going to read my footnote and say, oh, I better sue DC.
You're an attorney. Don't you think DC should have deferred to you on some of these things?
Yeah, good point.
They did. They ended up deferring on a lot of them. But it was a big surprise that they raised these issues. But so no, there wasn't much of Watchmen that I left out. Now I'm sure that there are things that I didn't get. I wasn't a punk rocker. I'm not English. And so I'm always afraid that there are things that I just totally missed. So, Ellen, if you have any on a list somewhere, don't share them.
I was going to notice you did draw from the RPG source book.
Yes.
a little bit, and that's that was done with Alan Moore's involvement.
Yes.
Was that the reason why you included that?
Well, I just thought it was canon. I
Okay.
decided that it was canon, and so I wanted to know more about these characters. And yes, there's a couple. I don't even remember them all anymore now. I think there's 2 or 3 RPG books, and they were very interesting and very helpful. And I thought it was useful to sort of contrast what was written in them as compared to what actually ended up in the text. Um, some of it's backstory, some of it is maybe a little different take on things, and so on. Some of it's future story. Here's what happened to this character, and so on. Uh, but it was a great deal of fun. But Mike, you were talking about the historical context in 1985,
Yeah.
and of course, the events of the book take place mostly in the 70s, during the height of the Vietnam War. And I realized as I was annotating it that, when did I do the book? In 2015 or 16 or something like that, that there were going to be readers who didn't know shit about the Vietnam War, that was ancient history to a lot of people, and that I needed to write footnotes explaining who's Richard Nixon, what was Watergate all about, who's Gerald Ford, who's Henry Kissinger, what was the Vietnam War about, etc., because that's historical material for those readers.
Yeah, in the introduction, I think you said something about for some people it'd be stale historical background, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I'm always astounded when my assistant in my office is like 32 or something. It's embarrassing all the things I end up having to explain to her. It's like, yes, you never heard of Steve Garvey, for example. We were talking about Steve Garvey yesterday, and who just ran for Senate in California. It's like, don't you know who he was? Nope.
Yeah. Alan, you're asking great questions. You got some more?
A couple.
Yeah.
So you did use the RPG source book. Did you at least? I know you didn't refer to them, but did you familiarize yourself with the non-Alan Moore Watchmen, the before Watchmen comic books?
Absolutely. Read the
Okay.
whole, and Doomsday Clock.
Oh, okay.
Read the whole thing. And I didn't think there was a lot. I don't remember when Doomsday Clock came out, but I didn't think there were things in there that needed to go into the notes. I think I did use some stuff from before Watchmen, but not much.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't sure that really sort of qualified as canon. But
What did you think of Doomsday Clock when you read it? Just as an aside.
it was a good story. It had very little to do with Watchmen, but it was a good
Yeah.
story and sort of interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's right up there. We could talk about the TV show as well. I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, interesting, not the real deal,
Right.
but
Do you since we're talking about Watchmen, do you personally prefer the storyline canon in the TV show or in the movie? Few differences.
oh boy. I watched the movie again recently, and the movie is, I think, better than people give it credit for.
Yeah, it's really good.
The Snyder knew the stuff. The problem is that you have to read the book. You can't make sense of the movie without having read the book. It's just too compressed. You can't do in 2 hours or whatever it was, 2.5 hours, what they did in the book. And so it's too compressed. That's the problem. And of course, I didn't like the ending change, but hey.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, for those who haven't seen it, it's been a while, so spoilers, but instead of what happens in the comic book, you have Dr. Manhattan as the thing that he uses for the imagined threat over the human race.
Yeah, I did go back and watch the Outer Limits show, though. Which does anybody else besides Alan, who's smiling, know what I'm talking about?
No.
So the basic plot is actually taken from an episode of The Outer Limits. And Alan Moore sort of acknowledged that with an homage in the final chapter where it's actually mentioned, as I recall, or it's playing in the background or something like that. I don't remember. Yeah, it's not very well done on Outer Limits, but it's sort of because it's short. But it's a plot about bringing world peace about through a fake alien invasion. And
Yeah, I wonder how much of that was inspiration from Reagan's little speech on that. You remember that? How Reagan said something like, talking about the Soviet Union and troubles with them and everything in the 80s, and he said, said something like, I wonder how quickly we would all unite if there was some threat from outer space, you know, which immediately
right,
UFO enthusiasm.
He
Sorry,
probably watched the Limits too.
probably.
There was a great Harry Turtledove, well, a very good Harry Turtledove series about aliens invading right in the middle of World War II. And that pretty much happened. The Allies and the Axis teamed up.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we have, Frederick Brown's Mars Invades, or whatever. Is that the name of it? Mars Invades?
Go home.
Yes, Martian Go Home, of course. Which unites the world, and everybody thinks they've solved the problem. Everybody takes credit for the solution.
Stephen on the live show asked an interesting question, and I'd like to apply it directly to Watchmen. He said, I do wonder, how does one approach or plan ahead on annotating a story? I'm just curious about the thought process. Like your collaboration with Gibbons and so forth. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, annotating depends on essentially a very slow reading of the material. I mean, so, if you can think about a book to annotate, when I'm going to annotate something, I mean, for example, I have been annotating, I've done 21, 22 books now for the Library of Congress Crime Classics series. Now, those are not in-depth annotations, but they're annotated. I mean, there are notes, and some of them have, I mean, one of the has 150 notes. So some of them really take a lot of effort. So it's read the book first, then go back, and I read it really slowly, and I put in what I refer to as dummy footnotes. I'll just drop in empty footnotes on words that need explaining, names that are clearly historical references that need some reference, something I don't understand, something that's an inconsistency. So I have all these sort of receptacles set when I start, and then I go through and fill them up one at a time. And it's for somebody who is a dilettante writer like me. I mean, as opposed to somebody who actually does this for a living and has it as their day job. This is ideal because it means that I can work for one night on a footnote or 3 or 4 footnotes and sort of knock them out, before I go to bed. And then move on to a wholly new subject for the next note. Sometimes I end up going into a deep dive on notes where it's just way deeper than I should because I just get fascinated. And sometimes it's just sort of quick and easy. It's informational. It's like, oh yeah, that name that popped up in that book is a person who was a boxer in 1934, and I'd never heard of him before, but yeah, there he is. So that's the process, is sort of to do that really slowly. Of course, I also immediately when I start a new book, I am a collector at heart, so I run out and I buy a lot of books. And those would be sort of anything that I think might have suggestions of the meaning of something in the text. And obviously, with the exception now, this is a really scary part, is that for Lord Dunsany, it's not going to be the new annotated because there's never been an annotated edition. So I read all the other annotated editions. Dracula, for example, there were, I think, 3 other annotated editions before I started mine. Lovecraft, there were the Joshi notes and Peter Cannon's notes and so on. Watchmen and Sandman, there was a good deal of fan-based annotation on the internet.
Didn't
Yeah.
Jess Nevin do a couple books on Watchmen? No, I'm sorry. That was League of Extraordinary.
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but there was a lot of fan annotation. And so sure, I read all of it. And I read it because I'm afraid of missing something, that they're gonna say, oh yeah, that was a song by The Clash. Well, great. I never listened to The Clash. I'm sorry. And so, I miss all those. So I want to find those, but I also want different opinions. It's like somebody says this is about that, and I say, no, it wasn't. It was about this. And it's nice to argue.
Okay, so on that note, step back, go to the 10,000-foot level. The people that have done this and like for Cliff Notes and other annotations, how much do you think people get wrong? And obviously it varies, but
yeah, it varies. I mean, it's not so much that they get it wrong. It's that they don't see, in some cases, first of all, in some cases, they're just incredibly boring. I mean, to be honest, I try not to write boring footnotes. I really try hard to have them be, I'm not witty, but, an approximation of wit, maybe. And fun. And I want people to say, well, that's cool. Or, wow, I didn't know that. So, yeah, a lot of the text, I mean, Clive Leatherdale, is that a great name? Clive Leatherdale, who did the annotated Dracula, had, I think, 3,000 footnotes for his text of Dracula. And I said, oh my God, this is just, overkill, such incredible overkill. But I haven't found too many situations where Dracula was interesting because the first annotations were done before they had access to to Stoker's notes. And so I had a lot more information than they did. And I also had seen the manuscript of Dracula, which nobody had. So Dracula was really a special case where I had sort of a lot more information available than anybody else who had done it, even though there'd been 3 previous annotators. But for Watchmen, yeah, I mean, they didn't see the scripts. So did they get some things wrong? Absolutely. Did they get some things right? Absolutely. And very astute scholarship out there by amateurs. By the way, I mean, I should say a word about the scripts. I talk about this somewhere in one of the introductions, and this applies to both Sandman and Watchmen because Neil learned from Alan how to write a script. So a typical Alan Moore script was 110 to 120 pages for a 22-page comic. So single spaced. So, I mean, he would write 3 or 4 pages about some of the panels. A single panel he might talk about it for 3 or 4 pages. And unlike what I thought naively, how comics were written, I thought, the artist was everything. The artist just sort of made up a story, drew a lot of pictures, drew in bubbles, and then sent it to the writer who filled in the bubbles. It's really the opposite. I mean, the writers typically now write a detailed, we'd call it a storyboard in the movie biz, a detailed description, panel by panel, of what you see and what your perspective is, who's in the frame, etc. Plus, of course, the dialogue. And then the great writers, Moore, Gaiman, all said the same thing, which is, here's my idea for the script, unless you have a better one. And then they would allow the artist to come up with better ideas if they had them for how to present the panel, what perspectives, etc. But tremendous amounts of detail in the scripts, very little of which ends up on the page. But I tried in my notes to indicate the really interesting stuff that was in the scripts that didn't make it onto the page.
Yeah, things like I'm going to come back to this in later issues, so this little thing, and so give it an extra focus, that kind of thing, I suppose.
And some of it, I mean, one of the most amazing things to me, I've talked about this elsewhere, I think.
Yeah.
For those who are Sandman fans, there's in one of the early issues, there's a box of stuff. Just, I've forgotten whose it is. I don't remember, but one of the things in the box is a snow globe. And that snow globe has no part whatsoever in the story. 40 issues later, it turns out to be the focus of the Baghdad episode. And it's just, and I said to Neil, did you know that? I mean, he was writing issue number 10. He had no idea that there was going to be a run of 50, 70 issues of it.
Right.
He was excited that they were going to do 12. So he said, no, it just seemed like it ought to be there. Those are the amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah, to me too. How did your collaboration with Dave Gibbons work for this, for Annotated Watchmen?
As I said, he gave me the scripts.
Right.
I went through the scripts in great detail, wrote all the notes, emailed the texts to him, and we went through them. I think we did it on the phone, is my recollection. We went over note by note, and he gave me corrections. He gave me insights into things that I had not quite understood. And in some cases said, yeah, great, good job.
Yeah.
Aside from your excellent commentary, it was also great to read the annotated edition for the black and white art. Just you could appreciate Dave Gibbons' talent.
It was
the pure line work in the.
Yeah, I mean, it was really. I was a little sad that we ended up doing both Watchmen and Sandman in black and white, but DC made the rational decision to do it in black and white. Those volumes were $50 each. And if we had done it in color, they would have been 100 each. And it wouldn't have been accessible. People would have said, $400 for Sandman? No, thanks.
Yeah, I was wondering that. Huh.
It was purely a cost issue. But to tell the opposite story about American Gods. So American Gods is William Morrow, I think, is the publisher. And when we started doing American Gods, I said to the editor, the in-house editor, I said, so I'll pull together illustrations. And she said to me, oh, no, we're not going to do any illustrations. And I said, okay, that's a shame. Why don't I send you a bunch of illustrations anyway, and you can look at them and then you can say no. Like, okay. So I did that. Pulled together all these pictures of the various gods, of places, historical figures, and so on, and including stills from the Stars TV show, and sent them to the editor. And she said, all right, we'll do these. Fine. So then they send me the galleys. And the galleys had this beautiful color in the introduction. And then the rest of the book is all black and white. And I said, oh, you saved money on the galleys by not printing the galleys in color. They said, no, that's the way the book's going to be. And I said, really?
God.
We have all this gorgeous color stuff for the rest of the book. They said, well, if we do that, we'll have to print in China instead of here in the United States. It'll take months longer. We won't do a Christmas release. Then they finally said, all right, it's a Neil Gaiman book. It doesn't matter when it comes out. And so they did it all in color. But it was a fun journey to get to the color illustrations in American Gods.
That's another lesson, and they'll forget how long it took, but they'll never forget the end product, how much they like it or don't like it.
I love doing the illustrations for all these books. I mean, that is the most fun. And that's by the way, I mean, sort of answering your question, Pete, about, or whoever it was that asked about process, um, that's the last step. As I'm writing the footnotes, I'm making notes to myself that I want to try and find a picture of that, whatever that is. Um, and in some cases, these are illustrated books. I mean, Jekyll and Hyde, I was very lucky. First of all, Otto Penzler went crazy with color in that book. He's sorry now, but he went crazy and published it with lots of color. Um, but I was very fortunate that there are, I think, 4 or 5 different public domain illustrated editions of Jekyll and Hyde. And so I was able to draw all these amazing, gather all these amazing illustrations to put throughout the book. So that one was a little different in that I had a very, very rich and deep source of illustrations. Sherlock Holmes was the same, of course. I had all the Pagets and many, many other public domain images. I mean, hundreds of public domain images that have been used to illustrate the stories over the years. But that's sort of one part of it. The other part of it is things, people, places, etc., where I just love looking for the illustrations for those things. That's the most fun. But that's long after the notes are done.
Yeah.
That's sort of the end of the book. Is I've turned in the manuscript. Now I got to put together these pictures. Sherlock Holmes, for example, that is the most illustrated edition of Sherlock Holmes ever published. There are well over 1,000 images in those 3 volumes. And I loved them. And by the way, I mean, I bought Strand magazines. I bought all kinds of stuff because I wanted to get the highest quality scans that I could. And that's why, excuse me for saying this, because I love books, but the ebooks are so beautiful because you can blow up the illustrations and see all of the details because they're such high quality scans.
Yeah.
Didn't you tell us,
For Dracula.
maybe I'm wrong, but I thought you were telling us at one point a couple of years back that some of the images that you were trying to get into some of these books kept coming back as copyrighted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had some lively discussions over the years, Norton and I, over what illustrations we could use and what size they could be. We finally sort of worked out a detente that was, some images are public domain, knock yourself out. Clearly, they're public domain. Other images are not public domain, or it's not clear whether they're public domain. For example, a postage stamp. It's not clear to me that that's public domain. I think it is, but that's not clear to me. And so the solution there was a combination of, first of all, keep them small, so they're 2 by 2 in most cases, at least in the book. In the ebook, you can make them as big as you want, but they're 2 by 2. And second, we concluded, fair use because I was very careful to put scholarly material with each image. Scholarly material meaning identifying carefully who's the artist, what's the source. This is a movie that came out in such and such year from such and such production company and so on. So this relies heavily on the so-called Bill Graham Presents case, in which a contemporary historian was doing a history of the 60s and wanted to use images from the Fillmore, from all the sort of psychedelic posters and all that stuff. And Bill Graham Presents, who owned those posters, owned those images, said, sure, license fees are 10,000 per image or something like that. And the writer said, screw that, and went ahead and used them anyway. And the court said, they're so essential to the history of that era that you couldn't leave them out. And so it was fair use to reproduce those images. Now, if you were doing a book of posters from the 60s, that's different. But if you're doing a history of the 60s and this is just sort of background stuff, that's okay. So that's what I had told you before, I think, Pete. And yeah, that still goes on. And that came up again. I mean, Otto wasn't particular, he trusted my judgment on this. I explained it to him and he trusted my judgment. But in Jekyll and Hyde, for example, there are a lot of comic book covers and movie posters and the like. I think those are probably public domain because they're advertising. That's what they were intended for. They weren't illustrations in that sense. And stills, movie stills are always a question about whether those are public domain or not. Generally, the courts have been very liberal with saying that stills are okay. They're not the movie. You're not sort of destroying the market for the movie because you have a still from it.
Yeah. What were some of the most, I don't know, surprising and intriguing things that you found out or came across when you were annotating Watchmen?
Uh, hmm. Well, I mean, though I lived through it, I mean, digging into the Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Kissinger stuff was really kind of fun. And the Vietnam War stuff was fun. Um, I don't remember a single annotation that sort of leapt off the page as being unique or surprising. Sorry.
No,
I
it's
don't have any,
fine.
I don't remember any good stories about that one blew me away, but
I appreciated your background on the Kitty Genovese case.
there you go. I mean, I try and pull in all this stuff. I mean, everything is fair game. So if I can find out something about something, I want to put it in there.
We were told that the bystanders just watched her being killed, but as the history has shown, that wasn't quite the
Right.
case.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't quite the case, but yeah, I mean, I've had some of the footnotes I've written over the years have stuck with me. They were just so much fun, but I don't remember any particular one from Watchmen. But if I go back through it, I'll find something, Mike. I just didn't.
I should have warned you like a week ago. I was going to
Yeah,
ask you this.
I should have looked through it and say, "Oh,
Except that I thought about it 30 seconds ago. So
note was so cool to write." Yeah, I didn't know that, but I've forgotten what they were now.
if you feel like it, you can always send it to me. I'll put it up as
There
an
you
article
go.
or something.
There you go.
For those who are watching and or listening later, or now, what you said really struck me about you try to make your annotations, your annotated books fun. And look, comparing a couple of annotated volumes with another annotator, I realized how true that was, that it was just more interesting to read.
Thank you. It's, I always say these books don't need Les Klinger to be great books.
Yeah.
They are great works of art. So my job is to try and open up the world, make it a little more interesting, maybe a little more accessible to readers. I'm not although I'd love to get an honorary degree in literature sometime, I'm not a professor. I love it when I get called professor, but hey, uh, I'm a fan, and so I approach these as a fan.
Well, I think that's one reason for the main reason for their popularity. So fans reading them have that same reaction.
It's interesting. I'd love to hear your guys' reaction. I don't know whether you've all read my annotated Dracula, but some of the critics were really off-put by my gamesmanship with Dracula. When I wrote the footnotes for Dracula, I approached it as a Sherlockian would. That is, this is a true story.
Yeah, right.
And let's pick it apart and find the parts that the author obfuscated, changed things, and so on. And so I spent a lot of time and effort on things like validating tide tables and train timetables and arguing this and that about this. And my thesis was actually somebody actually approached me about optioning this for a movie. And I thought, wow, somebody's going to sell my footnotes to a movie? My thesis was that Dracula didn't die. He survived the whole thing. And when he learned that the Harkers had gone to Stoker with these papers, so Harker and Stoker were friends because they both studied for the bar at the same time. So when Harker came to Stoker and said, "You're a published writer. Could you help us put this together into a book?" That Dracula approached Stoker and said, "You need to change things. You know, you can publish this. I'm not going to kill you, but I want the story. First of all, I want you to obscure the fact that I survived, and I want you to change this and that and so on." And I tried to explain to people that I never once changed the facts. I never made up facts about this thing or that thing that's mentioned in the books. I just kind of spun them.
I
And
gotta say, I read that annotated version. I've got several of your annotated books, like the Jekyll and Hyde, the Frankenstein, the which is my favorite, and the Sherlock Holmes. But to me, that while that it was enjoyable, I preferred the straight up annotations, like in Frankenstein.
okay,
You know, it for me, it was like not trying to read a second story. Does that make sense?
yeah, that's fair.
I just got the annotated Dracula. The hardcover is really expensive these days, but I got it in
Yeah.
paperback. Yeah, and sent one to Alan too. And so I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, I'm interested to hear your take. Some of the critics hated it. Some of the critics thought it was fun. I love doing it. And by the way, Frankenstein has some of that too, Matt. I'm sorry. Uh, there's some of the, hey, this is a true story, and so let's dig out the facts and check the facts against what's recorded here.
The
Just
fact,
my bias when I'm reading an annotated book is I want my story here or my annotations here.
Bye, Pete.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, he's that way. You have to.
Part of the Sherlock Holmes game, though.
That's right.
The fact that Dracula is an epistolary book, did that change anything? Did that make it more fun? Make it more challenging? Anything?
Oh, sure. It makes it much more challenging because of the dating elements of it. And so, yeah, I mean, talking about that, man, I mean, what's the point of chronology if you're not going to play the game? That this is a true story. If it's not a true story, then you say, well, the author screwed up. It's like the author didn't bother to pay attention. I just did a book like that. I just finished doing notes for a contemporary novel called The Cannibal Who Overate. It's a mystery novel by Hugh Pentecost, and it'll be in part of the Library of Congress Crime Classics series, set in 1961-ish. And I tried to figure out the date of the events that he describes in the story. And it was all jumbled up. It's like he had some real historical references to September of 1961. This is a book that was published in January of 1962. And yet there's some ages of the characters that make it 1960, and another thing that suggests it's 1962. And it's like, it drove me crazy. And the Library of Congress editors finally said, just cut all of it and just say the author jumbled it all up instead of trying to make sense of it. But I love that part of it too. And the epistolary parts of Dracula are challenging because of the dates. Each entry has a date on it. And so I tried very hard to do a timeline for that, and you'll see it in an appendix to the book.
Actually, have you seen the Daily Dracula
Yes.
series? Okay, so the way I did it was I had like your book in hand, and each day that's kind of how I consumed their version.
And then you end up trying to figure out what year it was. So the book's published in 1893. I'm sorry, it's published in 1897. Oh, gosh.
7 sounds right.
Yeah,
I want to say
1897.
97.
So, how do you make sense of
1897, yeah.
an appendix to it that says these events took place 7 years ago, when most scholars say the events took place in 1893? Like, doesn't work. So something's wrong. So I push it back to probably 1888. And I looked at a calendar and tried to find days that matched because some of the letters say, you know, Thursday, June 1st, and some of them just say May 20th. So forgive me, but you know, those kind of details really fascinate me. It's a sickness.
Matt, you do know that the Sherlock Holmes stuff is all true, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay, good. I just wanted to double check. Did
Well,
you?
the thing is, to be honest, one of my favorite things about Arthur Conan Doyle, it's because of my profession, is he has reminiscences of Dr. Bell, who's like a cousin of the doctor named Bell's palsy, who would actually do things that he had Holmes do, which is he'd see someone in clinic and be able to tell them where they lived, how many kids they had. I thought that part of that was just fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, of course. I mean, I've said many times, I've repeated this, that when I lecture about Holmes and I talk about Sherlock Holmes was born in 1854 and, you know, go through the whole chronology of Holmes, Watson, and Doyle, somebody usually raises their hand and says, "Excuse me, Professor Klinger, is Sherlock Holmes real or fictional?" And my answer is always the same. Yes.
Now I'm slowly building up the Leslie Klinger annotated
Oh, thank
library,
you.
and I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. Haven't gotten to it yet, but did you figure out where Watson was wounded? I'm sure that was one of the
Well, of course.
arm or
Actually,
the leg.
I rely on my dear friend Lori King for the answer to that. Lori has the definitive answer that appeared in an essay. She gave a talk at the Baker Street Irregulars dinner, and then it appeared in the Baker Street Journal, an essay explaining how he was wounded in the leg and the shoulder as a result of a Jezzail bullet, because the Afghan soldiers basically relied on homemade bullets. They weren't supplied by the British Army. They were finding pieces of shrapnel and all kinds of pieces of metal and making their own bullets. And so these bullets were pretty clumsily made. And in fact, it was certainly possible for the bullet to split and strike in the shoulder and leg simultaneously.
There you go.
It
That's a
is the
great
perfect,
answer.
it is the perfect solution.
How many women was he married to, and were they all named Mary?
Oh, well,
Oh.
that's a whole other issue.
Yeah,
That's a whole other issue.
that's why you buy the books.
I go for two, but you know, I'm not one who says, "Oh, it was always Mary." It was two.
But he did love or know many women on most of the continents.
That's right.
Yeah, he was
Absolutely.
quite the player.
The fair sex was his department.
Yes. Who's your favorite Holmes actor? You're gonna say Jeremy Brett, right?
Of course I am.
Okay, good.
Although, you know, I must say I'm very fond of the Downey films. I mean, for the reason that, of course, I was the technical advisor.
Right,
But
he called. Yeah, yeah.
I'm very fond of them. I especially like Jude Law. I thought I would put Jude Law as the finest Watson. Um, Probably second to either David Burke or Ted Hardwicke. I mean, you know, sort of pick one, but and Brett was just so careful about his portrayal of Holmes. That's what struck me most. I was not a big Benedict Cumberbatch fan. Um, I love Johnny Lee Miller in Elementary. I thought he was great. But
That's a
yeah,
show I didn't think I would like, and it turned out I really liked it a lot.
Are
Elementary.
you guys watching Watson?
No, I saw it advertised, and I was wondering about it though.
Well, full disclosure, I'm a technical consultant on the show, so
So watch it. Okay.
yeah, so watch it. The scripts are great. It's interesting. It's House. You know, freely admit that it's basically House with
Right.
Watson. But it's clever. It's got a lot of interesting things going for it. So it's worth watching. You may not like it, but it's worth watching. And then there's the Enola Holmes films. I hope you've seen those.
Oh, the
Long
first.
time ago.
Yeah, the second one is terrific. And they're supposed to start shooting on a third one. I'm waiting. I was the technical advisor on both of those, and I'm hoping that I'll get to work on the third film, but I haven't seen a script yet. So,
Supposedly another Downey film coming.
well, that's been supposedly for 10 years now. So, it's we'll see. Everybody wants to do one. It's just sort of been trying to find a good script. I actually gave them a treatment for a script. And they said, "Oh, that's all right. We have our own writer." And of course, that writer didn't produce anything either. So we'll see.
Steven's got another good question for you. Is there a dream book you'd like to annotate? That you haven't-
Oh, so many,
yeah.
so many. I mean, there's a lot of dream books, but I'll mention a few. One of them is an obscure book called The Lodger. Some of you may know the book. Some of you know the film, the Alfred Hitchcock film. Um, it's about a couple in London, pensioners who have a lodger occupying the top floor of their house, and slowly they come to the belief that he's Jack the Ripper. And so it's a Ripper story, and I really want to do a Ripper book at some point. That's one of my dream books. Um Neil Gaiman and I have talked multiple times about that he wanted me to do Kim, which I love the idea of doing Kim. There's so much to say about the Raj and the great game of the era and so on. Um, I just pitched a publisher on doing the Maltese Falcon. I don't think that's going to happen, but I would really like to do that.
So I ask, are you a Ripper aficionado too?
Sure.
Who was he? What's
Well,
your
I'm starting to settle on Kosminski here. It seems to be that the more and more evidence that he's the guy. But the those who are interested in the Ripper should be reading the Ripperologist, which is a wonderful magazine about all things Ripper and all theories Ripper. And
Yeah. With this closed by, I want to ask you one more Watchmen question, and then I thought we could close with the Lovecraft annotated. A couple questions on that. What what intrigued you about Watchmen in the first place before you did the annotation, when you were just reading it? What about this appeals to you so much?
Just a compelling story. I mean, and those are my people. I mean, those are my people in that I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I mean, I am old. So those were contemporary stories to me. And the story was it was this perfect combination of grappling with a truly turbulent era and science fiction. So it was just the perfect intersection of that. I loved the book, and also I knew how deep it was, how culturally rich it was, and that made it an ideal object to annotate.
So talk about your two Lovecraft volumes. I know you did several years ago, especially when I think the second one came out. Well, when both of them came out.
Well, so
But
the first thing I
yeah,
want to say is that, I told you, Mike, that my wife died recently,
yes.
and she she was always my proofreader. I had a pattern of reading aloud the stories to her to check the text against the first editions, and we did do Lovecraft, and oh my, she was just like blown away. It was like, this stuff is so weird. Why are you annotating it? But she was very patient, and we got through all the stories. She had to put up with my attempts to pronounce some of the things in the stories, but anyway, so bless her for her hard work on all my books, always. And she is my inspiration and was always my biggest cheerleader. So I miss her a lot.
I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. But so Lovecraft was really interesting in unique in the books that I've done in that it came about through the suggestion of Norton. It wasn't one where I went to Norton and said, "Can I do Lovecraft?" Um, I had pitched multiple other things to Lovecraft, to Norton, to which they'd said no. And Bob Weil, senior editor of Norton, said, "What about HP Lovecraft? Have you thought about doing an annotated edition of that?" And I had read, as I said, I had read tons of science fiction, but I had frankly never read a single Lovecraft story. I had heard of him because his influence is so pervasive among other writers.
Right.
So I knew that he was somebody that I ought to know about, but I knew nothing about him or his work. So that was a deep, deep dive to do those books. Fortunately, there is a depth of material. There is I mean, I think you guys are very familiar with the sort of the historical arc of the popularity of Lovecraft, that it really became, it started really in the 70s, when what was a tiny cult of worshipers, if you want to call them that, um, started getting bigger, started getting sort of mainstream critical attention, and books being published that had never, that had only been published for a tiny audience before. Um, and so there is a lot of Lovecraftian scholarship. And I read it all. I read every single book. I read every book, every issue of Lovecraft Studies, every issue of Nyctalope, and I mean everything.
Wow.
I read everything, looking for material that I could incorporate into annotations, and did. And frankly, I mean, that's what I set out to do. St. Joshi, St. is a fascinating guy. I guess I like to call him a friend. I don't think there's ever been any sort of real rivalry between us. Um, but his annotations were all about his opinions. Um, in not a single annotation of the stories that he annotated does he mention that any other scholars had any opinions whatsoever on anything. Um, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to approach it the way I've approached everything, which is to try and show the reader this wide range of scholarship, and the depth of the material out there. And so that's, frankly, I mean, ST's annotations are brilliant. Um, those editions are hard to come by now, the paperbacks. But I really had this sort of different mindset of trying to cast my net very broadly in terms of bringing in Lovecraftian scholarship. And I was honored and really touched by the warm reception from the Lovecraftian community, when I was working on the books and when they started to come out.
I would just comment one thing that I thought you did extremely well that I thought Joshi had sort of glossed over were about his racism. I thought as not that I want to dwell on this, but like I think Joshi gives him a real pass.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that was fair. So that, I mean, apart from everything else, I love the book for all the pictures, photographs, map,
Sure.
all that stuff is fantastic. But I liked the fact that you didn't shy away from the warts.
You had to deal with it. I mean, in my view, you just had to. Neil Gaiman and I had a very public conversation about that at a bookstore when the book had just come out. And, we both sort of had the same thing to say, which is understanding Lovecraft's paranoia, and his deep psychological problems is critical I mean, it gave the power to these stories. Here's a man who was frightened to death of anybody who wasn't like him, who wasn't from Providence, who wasn't white. Even the Jews that he had as friends, what he liked about them was that they had assimilated. They weren't they weren't annoyingly Jewish. Um, and that atmosphere just pervades the stories. It's hard to avoid. Um, After the books came out, I did a panel, which is out there on YouTube somewhere, for the HP Lovecraft Film Festival, in which I asked, you can tell when it was, because the title is how do we read HP Lovecraft when Black Lives Matter? And I assembled a couple of writers of color and Matt, the author of Lovecraft Country, and we talked about
Rough.
this.
Matt Ruff.
Yeah.
Matt Ruff, and we talked about this, and it's tough. I mean, Victor Laval, who wrote the introduction,
Yeah, I was gonna say.
the second volume, Victor is a black man, and he had to grapple with it himself personally. Sort of how could he hold his head up, admitting that he was reading Lovecraft?
Yeah.
Um,
And he's a fan of this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and has written some fine Lovecraftian stories of his own.
Yeah, and if you're considering being a patron, he is one. So, be cool like Victor. This is the first volume, and
That's the second cover of the first volume, we should note, for the
Okay.
completists who want everything. That's that. There's an alternate cover for the first volume.
For those who've not had a chance to pick these up yet, can you explain the difference between the two volumes and the stories that you selected?
Sure. I mean, we started out, originally it was going to be like, well, so Norton said to me, what do you want to include? Same as they said with Sherlock Holmes. What stories do you want to include? And I said, well, all of them. He said, okay, well, we can't do that because the book has got to be, under 1,000 pages long. I think the Lovecraft volume is 900 pages or something like that. So in picking out stories, I know that some people were disappointed that stories like The Music of Eric Zahn, The Outsider, Rat in the Walls are not in the first volume. But I ended up when I realized that we had to sort of limit it, um, I tried to pick the theme of Arkham. So the first volume is pretty much the Arkham stories, which is why the second volume is cleverly titled Beyond Arkham, uh, uh, to try and give a clue to readers that that's what they're going to find. So, I just had to be ruthless and cut out some of the really good stories because they just didn't really sort of relate to Arkham.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of publishing is you can't do a 2,000 page book.
I'm really happy with them. As I said, they're intriguing annotations, they're fun annotations, lots of images and so forth. Let's see, there's a Kindle edition of Annotated Watchmen, of Frankenstein. I don't think there is of the Lovecraft ones, is there? Or is there?
I don't know.
I
I
don't
don't
think there is. It looks like there is if you're on Amazon with these, and then you click over and it's a different edition. It's just the stories itself. So
Yeah. I don't know. I've been pushing Norton to consider doing ebooks of all of them
yeah, that'd be
because
great.
I think they'll sell. And as I said, the illustrations, it's so great to have the ebook and be able to blow up the illustrations on an iPad or something like that. Um, and it's not that expensive to do. The Lovecraft volumes, to my surprise, I mean, Bob Weil was so smart about this. Sherlock Holmes did pretty well. I mean, it's been out now it's hard to believe that those books are now more than 20 years old. The first two volumes came out in 2004.
Right.
They continue to sell. Lovecraft exploded. I mean, we're not talking New York Times bestseller kind of sales, but for this kind of a book that at $40 or $50 a piece or whatever they are, retail, they have sold really well. So that's the good news is that there's a big audience out there for Lovecraft. and very happy. So you see an ebook of Annotated Lovecraft. Okay, good.
Yeah, that is
I'm
good.
not sure I have them. I may not own them.
I'm with you. I love having books. I got books all around me, but at the same time, I've got a Kindle too, and there are pluses and minuses to print, and there's
Yeah.
positives
Well,
and
even better
negatives
than the
too.
Kindle,
Yeah.
even better than Kindle, by the way, Mike, is the iPad.
Mm.
Just because if you got an iPad Pro or whatever, you get this big screen with huge blown up illustration on it, where you can really get into the details.
Oh, it's
And
good to
some of
know.
the maps and illustrations are just magnificent.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm dying to hear the audio of the Lovecraft book, and so while we were sitting here, I went ahead and downloaded it.
Well, thank you.
I'm looking forward to that.
Have
Yeah.
fun. It was really a trip to do it.
Yeah, now that's what you'll be listening to for the next few
Oh
months while
yeah,
you're
a
walking.
while.
While you're walking.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
yeah, you can dip into it and go back and all that and skip some of the stories because you hate
Sure.
the stories.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Well, if we're doing the Lovecraft rereads on the show, so that's probably how I will. When I need to read the next tale, I'll listen to it.
there you go.
Well, last time you heard about an audiobook from either me or this show, you went and did all the Repairman Jack series.
Yeah.
You blitzed through it.
Yeah, I did, and and like I mentioned a little while ago, I had just picked up the, Jack, the early years audiobooks, and I'm on the last one right now.
Oh, how are they? How are they?
They're good. They're not as gripping, I don't think, as the as the original series, but I'm still loving it. I mean, it's great to get back into the world. Paul gets pretty sadistic in these books, man.
Does he?
And he's the sweetest guy.
Yeah, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, he is. Well, thank you for doing this, Les. I've already kept you like
My
about
pleasure,
twice
Mike.
the amount of time I said I was going to.
Hey,
So-
it was great fun. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, guys. Thanks for all the questions for Les.
Okay, prize.
Yes. Oh, prize. I'm sorry.
Okay, so remember, even if you're listening to this a couple weeks from now, you can still enter the drawing for a copy of the game, Cthulhu the Great Old One. Just send an email to ezingprizes@gmail.com. Put green in the subject heading. It's the color of the box. We'll draw a winner in maybe 8 weeks, and who knows, could be you.
This is another thing you bought and never, because it's still in the original packaging.
Yeah, well, I'm keeping the purple one.
Oh, okay. All right. Good. That's not a future prize.
Well,
Well, keep up the good work, guys.
Yes.
Keep the
Thank
faith.
you, Les.
That was a pleasure, Les.
be eager to see what you do next.
Yep.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Take care, guys.
Have a good night.
All right. Good night, guys. Gotta run.
Yep. Me too, everyone. Thanks for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.
See you later.
Recording stopped.